Hello friends and welcome to my channel. Myself Manthan, and today I am going to explain you about the cerebellum and its function. So before I start explaining you this diagram, let me give you a general idea about the cerebellum. That cerebellum is the largest portion in the hindbrain, which is situated in the posterior cranial fossa behind the brainstem, and cerebellum contains both the grey matter as well as the white matter. Grey matter, which is situated in the peripheral area, and the white matter, which is situated in the central area, or I can say as the part of inner layer in the cerebellum. So as you can see in this diagram, that this much area, the outer margin, so this layer is termed as an grey matter. Let me write it over here that this is grey matter, and the central area, which is inside the grey matter, that is termed as an white matter. Okay, so that is the grey matter and white matter. Now in grey matter there are many nuclei which are arranged in three layers. So there is outermost layer, intermediate layer and the inner layer, and these are the three sub layers of this one, that is the grey matter. Now you can see a photograph in your screen, that in that I have shown the outermost layer, which contains stellate cells, and the intermediate layer, that is the Purkinje cells. Now Purkinje cells are the main important cells which are present in the grey matter of the cerebellum, and the innermost, that is glomerulus cells, which are present. Now all of these cells, they are arranged in layers only in the grey matter. For the white matter contains multiple afferent as well as the efferent nerve fiber and its bundles. Now you may imagine that cerebellum has three types of fibers. That there are some of the association fibers, there are commissural fibers, as well as there are some projection fibers. Now they may connect right to left half of the cerebellum, or one part of the brain to the another part of the brain, and of same side of the cerebellum. So two structures on the same side of the cerebellum, they are connected by such type of fibers. So these all are the fibers. Mainly when the fibers which coming in and out of the cerebellum, they are not arranged randomly. Do remember these things. Fibers which are coming in and going out of the cerebellum, they are not arranged randomly. Those fibers are divided into three different bundles or three different groups. Those are known as cerebellar peduncles. There are three cerebellar peduncles. First is the superior cerebellar peduncle, second is the middle cerebellar peduncle, and the third one, that is inferior cerebellar peduncle. Let me show it in this diagram. That as we know the relation of the cerebellum, that cerebellum, it occupies a space in the posterior cranial fossa. Just anterior to that, there is brainstem. So in the brainstem, the uppermost, that is the midbrain. Let me write it over here, that is the midbrain. Inferior to midbrain lies the pons, and the lowermost portion of the brainstem, that is medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. So midbrain is connected to the cerebellum by one peduncle. There is the one peduncle which is termed as a superior cerebellar peduncle. Let me write it with another color, that this is superior cerebellar peduncle. Now connection between the cerebellum and the pons by this peduncle, that is the middle cerebellar peduncle, and between the medulla oblongata and the cerebellum, so that is inferior cerebellar peduncle. So the three, superior, middle and the inferior cerebellar peduncles. In that, one important thing that we need to remember, that middle cerebellar peduncle and the inferior cerebellar peduncle, both are mainly afferent. Both are containing mainly the afferent nerve fibers. Afferent nerve fibers. Whereas the superior cerebellar peduncle, It contains the efferent nerve fibers. I hope this functional anatomy is clear to you regarding the cerebellum. Again, let us revise the functional anatomy. That cerebellum occupies a space in the posterior cranial fossa, outermost layer that is grey matter, innermost layer that is the white matter. There are three peduncles. Fibers are not arranged randomly. They are arranged in groups in the form of a peduncle. There are three peduncles: the superior peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle, and the inferior cerebellar peduncle, in which the middle and the inferior, they both contain the afferent nerve fiber, and the superior cerebellar peduncle contains the efferent nerve fiber. Now there are divisions of the cerebellum. So actually I'm going to start about the functions of the cerebellum. So functions are, in general, if I tell you, so cerebellum is responsible for maintaining tone, posture and equilibrium. These are the main three functions that is regulated in our body by this structure. So tone, posture, equilibrium, remember these three things. Rest all functions that I am going to explain, and how does the cerebellum helps in regulating and maintaining the tone. So let us start with the first one, that is the vestibulocerebellum. So very interesting. First, let me clear all these things. First, let us start with the vestibulocerebellum. So vestibulocerebellum, as the name suggests, it is connected with the vestibule apparatus. So there is connection of the cerebellum with the vestibular apparatus. And vestibular apparatus, which is actually a sensory organ, so which receives the sensory inputs and in the form of any change in the gravity, linear movement and the angular acceleration. Let me write all these three things. That vestibular apparatus, which is actually the sensory organ, which senses about the gravity. Second thing is the linear movement, and the third one, that is the angular acceleration. So any sensory information about these three things which is received by the vestibular apparatus is sent to the cerebellum, and there is a connection between these two. That's why we call it as a vestibulocerebellum. Now whenever there is any alteration in any three of this which is assessed by the cerebellum, so what does the cerebellum do? Cerebellum inhibits the vestibular apparatus as well as the reticular formation in the medulla. So if you remember, when I posted a video about the ascending tracts of the spinal cord, I told you that spino-reticular tract, which is the ascending tract, similarly there is one descending tract also, that is reticulospinal tract. So reticulospinal tract and the spino-reticular tract, both are actually responsible for our consciousness, our awareness. Now whenever there is any problem in gravity, linear movement and the angular acceleration, which is assessed by the cerebellum, and the cerebellum inhibits both of them, it stimulates the alpha motor neuron present in the anterior grey horn of the spinal cord. I explained when I told in my video of transverse section of the spinal cord, that is spinal cord part 2. If you have not watched that video, do watch it, and in that I have explained in detail where the alpha motor neuron is located. But for now, remember that cerebellum inhibits the reticular formation and the vestibular apparatus, and it stimulates the alpha motor neuron present in the anterior grey horn, and thus it increases the muscle tone. And this is how our body's tone, posture and equilibrium is maintained. So that was all about the mechanism of vestibulocerebellum. Now comes the second thing, that is spinocerebellum. So first let me clear all these things. Second is spinocerebellum. So spinocerebellum, as the name suggests, it has connection with the spinal cord. That's why we name it as a spinocerebellum. But here we need to understand that spinocerebellum, which receives the information from the auditory receptors, from the visual receptors, from the proprioceptors, and accordingly it helps in the maintenance of tone, posture and equilibrium. So that is the major function of the spinocerebellum. Here we need to remember one thing, that if you know that in our cerebral cortex the orientation of our body parts is in a upside down direction, which means that the head of our body, which is actually represented in our cerebral cortex in the most bottom portion, but in the cerebellum our body's structures, different body parts, they are represented in the same manner as we see in our patients. So there is not a structure like the homunculus which is present in the cerebral cortex, that it shows the upside down kind of presentation in the cerebral cortex, but here in the cerebellum it is not present. Here all the structures, they appear in a similar manner as we see. So spinocerebellum, it receives the information from the different sides and regulates the tone, posture and equilibrium. Now comes the third and the most important and my favorite portion, that is the corticocerebellum. So the third one, that is corticocerebellum. So the corticocerebellum, which is, from its name we can conclude that it has some of the connections with the cerebral cortex. That's why I call it as a corticocerebellum. It has connection with the cerebral cortex, but it has many functions. So in that, the first function, that is the damping action. So damping action, it is actually the terminology of physics, but we use it because cerebellum makes our movement very smooth and accurate. So how does it do this thing? Suppose I draw this diagram. This is actually the diagram of physics, in which you can easily observe the decrease in the magnitude. That if I draw a line like this, and you can see that there is reduction in the magnitude of this wave. So there is concept of physics, but how do we apply it over here? That what does the cerebellum do? Cerebellum, whenever any movement which is very exaggerated or high in the intensity, cerebellum reduce it. So cerebellum helps in the reduction of intensity, and this is the major function which is only done when the cerebellum has connection with the cerebral cortex. So cerebellum sends the impulses to the cerebral cortex to inhibit such kind of impulses which makes the movement exaggerated. So that is the major action and the most important function of the cerebellum, and this is why our movement becomes smooth and accurate. So that was all about the damping action. So let me write it over here. The first function that we have seen, that is the damping action. Second function, that is the helps in the skilled work. So skilled work, so best example is the typing, dancing, cycling, all these kind of activities we can call it as a ballistic movement, or I can say the skilled work. So whenever we are talking about these kind of skilled work, we must learn it, and we must have that much tone, that much equilibrium and the maintenance of our posture, which is only done by the cerebellum. So the skilled work like typing, dancing, cycling, which includes the rapid alternating movement, but which is directly connected with our third function, that is the timing and the programming. Timing, programming of the movement. Programming of movement. So number two, that is skilled work, and the number 3, that is timing, programming of the movement, both are actually the interconnected. How does they are interconnected? So the skilled work like typing, dancing, cycling, right, they all are skilled work that we know. But whenever it comes to timing, so during our learning process, the cerebellum, it helps in planning and programming of the movement in a very sequential manner, and it sends the impulses to the sensory cortex. So there is a communication between the sensory cortex of the cerebrum and the cerebellum, that is typically the corticocerebellum. So because of this connection, whenever we are starting with the same movement, suppose I am going for the cycling today, and today I am learning, and tomorrow I am going to do again the same thing, so that memory is stored in my brain, and whenever I am trying to execute that same function, so this timing and programming of that skilled work helps me to execute that function properly, and with the help of the damping action, I make it smooth and accurate. So this is the function of the corticocerebellum. Still one function is remaining, so that is the servo mechanism. Servo mechanism means what? It is very short and easy to understand, that servo mechanism, which means that avoiding of any distraction, disturbances or the interference. Whenever we are executing any kind of skilled activities, so we need to be focused, and we are not supposed to do this thing with any kind of disturbances or interference in our sequential movement patterns. So servo mechanism, the function of the corticocerebellum, helps us in doing that thing in a very smooth and accurate manner, and with the same tone or the alternating tone if we are going for any kind of ballistic activities, posture and the equilibrium. Last one and the most important thing, that is the comparator function. Now let me write it over here, that comparator function. Comparator function means what? Whenever a person does any kind of activities, let us assume that the person is cycling. Okay, so how does the comparator function helps in the maintenance of the tone, posture and equilibrium? So first we need to observe that cycling is a kind of rapid alternating movements. It needs the proper posture as well as the alternating tone, and we must maintain our balance over that bicycle. So cerebellum helps in achieving this thing. How does the cerebellum helps us? That our pyramidal tracks that I explained in my previous video, which are responsible for the voluntary movement, and a person does the voluntary movement whenever a person is cycling. So the motor impulses which are released from the cerebral cortex, that is the higher center, okay, which are going downward through the pyramidal tracks, and similarly the muscles which are functioning at the lower level in the lower limbs, they are also functioning. So the proprioceptors as well as the Golgi tendon organ, the receptors which are present over there, it sends the impulses upwards, as well as the motor fibers, they are coming downward with the motor impulses. Whenever this thing is going on, the cerebellum compares both. It compares the impulses which are coming from the cerebral cortex and coming from the muscular levels. It compare it, and if any extra impulses are coming, cerebellum communicates with the cerebral cortex, and it helps in achieving that major extra fiber or the extra information is cut off, extra impulses are cut off from the cerebral cortex. That's why we get a proper rhythm, we get the proper posture, and we achieve that particular equilibrium. So the information from both the ends, that is the central as well as the peripheral, is going through the cerebellum. Cerebellum compares it, and it helps in achieving the proper balance and the smooth and accurate movement. So that was all about the functions of the cerebellum. I hope you like my concept and my content. If you like it, do like, share and subscribe my channel. Don't forget to hit that bell icon so that you will get the notification whenever I post a new video. Thanks for watching the video till the end. Do share these videos maximum. Thank you so much.